Title: The First Class Mistake, A Lesson in Assumptions. The cabin buzzed with soft conversations and the occasional shuffle of luggage as passengers settled into their first-class seats, where luxury and comfort were expected. A flight attendant, her steps purposeful and her uniform pristine, moved through the aisle, exuding authority. Her name tag read MS. Reynolds. She stopped abruptly in front of a young boy seated by the window. Her expression was impassive, almost cold. "You need to move. This seat isn't for you," she stated flatly. The boy blinked, tightening his grip around his boarding pass. "But this is my seat." MS. Reynolds' lips thinned into a straight line. "I don't think so." Nearby passengers peeked over their magazines and tablets. Some whispered, others stared silently, but no one intervened. No one asked questions. What they didn't know, what she didn't know, was that this boy wasn't just any passenger. And by the time this plane touched down MS, Reynolds would deeply regret the assumptions she made that day. Ethan Sanders, barely 12, sat quietly, his hands resting on the armrests as he gazed out the window. The low hum of the aircraft filled the cabin, mingling with the muffled chatter of fellow travelers. This was his first time flying alone, a gift from his father for earning straight A's. It wasn't just about the luxury of first class. It was about what he had achieved. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, young man." MS. Reynolds said, standing over him. Her stance was rigid, her face unreadable. Ethan turned, confused. "Yes." She glanced at his boarding pass without really looking. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" He pulled the ticket from the pocket of his hoodie and held it out. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 3B. Her eyes skimmed it briefly before she shook her head. "This is a first-class seat." "I know," Ethan replied, his small voice growing smaller. "Where are your parents?" she asked sharply. "I'm traveling alone." Her patience was thinning. There must be a mistake. This seat is reserved for first-class passengers only. A heavy silence settled over the cabin. Passengers glanced at one another, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. No one said a word. "But this is my seat," Ethan insisted, gripping the ticket tighter. "MS." Reynolds forced a stiff smile. "There's been some confusion. You need to take your things and move to economy." He crawled up Ethan's neck. He wasn't causing trouble. He had proof he belonged here. But the growing tension made it harder to stand his ground. His ears burned from the weight of the silent judgment around him. Reluctantly, he grabbed his backpack and stood. His legs wobbled slightly as he stepped into the aisle. "MS." Reynolds didn't offer to help. She simply turned and gestured toward the back. "This way." As he walked past rows of first-class passengers, many avoided his gaze. Others squirmed in their seats, but none spoke up. He finally slid into an empty seat in economy. The space felt cramped, the air heavier. Ethan pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. "Dad, they made me move to the back. Said I couldn't sit in first class. I had my ticket." She didn't believe me. The reply was almost instant. "What do you mean? Who made you move?" Ethan typed quickly. "The flight attendant. She said it was a mistake." A pause. "What's the flight number?" Ethan sent it. "Stay where you are. I'll handle it." He didn't know exactly what his father meant, but somehow he felt reassured. At the front of the plane, MS. Reynolds stood in the galley, a satisfied smirk on her face. Another problem, handled. Nicole, a junior flight attendant, hesitated as she set down a tray of glasses. She had seen it all, the cold dismissal, the quick judgment. Was there an issue with his ticket? Nicole asked gently. MS. Reynolds scoffed. "Please. You saw him. Do you really think he paid for first class?" Nicole's stomach twisted. She had seen passengers of all backgrounds in first class. Something about the way MS. Reynolds spoke didn't sit right with her. "But you didn't even check the system," Nicole pointed out. "I don't need to. I can spot who belongs up here." MS. Reynolds replied, brushing her off. Before Nicole could respond, the intercom crackled. "MS. Reynolds, please report to the cockpit." Her brow furrowed. It wasn't common for a flight attendant to be summoned mid-service. Something was off. In the cockpit, the captain, a seasoned pilot with salt and pepper hair, turned to face her. He wasn't alone. On the in-flight phone screen was a man in a sleek office, city views behind him. His face was calm, unreadable. "Ms. Reynolds," the man on the screen began. "Do you know who I am?" She swallowed. "No, sir." The captain's jaw tensed. "This is Mr. Sanders, the owner of this airline." Her throat went dry. "You removed his son from first class," the captain continued, "without verifying his ticket, without following protocol. Ms. Reynolds felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Sanders didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You will walk back, apologize, and personally return my son to his seat. And when this plane lands, you'll explain this to the executive board." The screen went dark. For the first time in her 15-year career, Ms. Reynolds felt pure panic. Ethan sat quietly in economy, his face calm, but his mind racing when Ms. Reynolds appeared, her confidence gone. "Sir," she began, her voice softer than before, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to escort you back to your original seat." Ethan didn't move. "A misunderstanding?" She nodded quickly. "There was an error. I showed you my ticket," he replied, his voice steady. "You still told me to move." Passengers around them exchanged glances. They had seen what happened. Ms. Reynolds hesitated before admitting, "I made a mistake in judgment. Please, let me make it right." Ethan studied her. Then he pulled out his phone. Moments later, Ms. Reynolds' work tablet vibrated. She opened it with shaky hands. A message from the executive office flashed. "Make sure he understands why this matters." Ethan looked up at her. "I'll go back, but I want to know, why did you assume I didn't belong here?" Her face flushed deep red. Around them, passengers leaned in, their curiosity piqued. I was wrong," she whispered. Ethan stood, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "Yeah, you were." The landing was smooth, but Ms. Reynolds felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her. As passengers gathered their bags, the intercom buzzed. "Ms. Reynolds, please remain on board." Her stomach dropped. One by one, passengers filed out. Some glanced at her, others didn't. Finally, Ethan passed by. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of what had happened. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, but no words came out before he disappeared down the jet bridge. A security officer appeared at the door. "Come with me." Her legs felt like lead as she followed him out. The bright lights of the airport felt harsh, exposing. For the first time, she wasn't just an authority figure. She was the one being judged. The lesson. This wasn't just about a seating error. It was about assumptions, how a snap judgment can strip someone of dignity and leave a lasting impact. It's a reminder for all of us. How we treat others, especially when we think no one is watching, truly matters. If this story made you reflect, leave a comment below. What would you have done if you were on that flight? Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that make you think. Thanks for watching. See you next time.